Okay, today we're going to do Picasso. Pablo Picasso was born in Malaga, in Spain, on the southern coast, on the Mediterranean, in 1880? Let's say 1880. His father was an art teacher at a school. And so he was encouraged from early on to draw, and he literally painted and drew all his life. All his life. I wonder how many days in his life he did not paint, but I think the number would not be many. And he lived to be 90. I'm not remembering dates very well. That's strange. But let me check real fast. This is part of Dr. Shins and my game, that these things are a little bit impromptu. 1881 born, died 1973, so 92 years old. When he was 18, he went... Why don't I just follow this and not guess? Okay. His family certainly moved. Let's see, vacations and okay. The family moves when he's 14 to Barcelona, and there his training is more serious, a better place to learn. His earliest known painting that survives is from when he was 16 years old. Remarkable in itself, really. And he goes to Madrid and spends some time in Madrid too. In 1900, with the new century, that's when he becomes serious. He has a friend, Casagemas, a young friend who also paints. He sells some paintings at 19, and let's see now, I'm sorry, but this, I'd like to get these dates straight. 1901, he returns to Madrid again. I want to know when he went to Paris. Okay, 1902. 1902, he goes to Paris. Paris became the center of his productive life for the rest of his year, for the rest of his life. And that is part of the explanation why Paris has been the center of art for so long. Is it still? Maybe. Arguably New York is, but Paris, the French dominated. France dominated Western art. I think we could say from 1850 to 2000, 150 years. That's remarkable. That's amazing. Modern art has been really French, and even today, I suspect it's the French artists who dominate. I'm not, I confess, in touch with what's going on or what has gone on in the past 20 years, but France's and Paris's domination is remarkable in any art form. Okay, he goes to Paris, and in 1902, so he's 21 years old, let's say. Until 1905, he knows some hard times there. He knows some poverty. He and Casagemas share an apartment. It's cold in the winter. I'm sure they burn some canvases to make heat sometimes. Sounds romantic, but I think it's probably true. Now, here's a man then who was painting seriously for 70 years. Preparation, that's serious too, but I admit, but who produced important paintings for 70 years. There is no parallel in any art or in any realm of thought to such a thing. That in itself is remarkable. I'm going to try to get at why Picasso is great. I hesitate with that, but I guess he is. If he's great, in what ways he's great, in my opinion. And really, I must disclaim a little bit. I'm not sure how much my opinion is worth with Picasso. He's so big. He's so difficult to assess. But let's take as a premise. A premise is that the man really could draw and paint almost anything he wanted, and this from a very early age. Then why did he produce the things that he did? Why did he produce the things which, frankly, are not pleasing to the eye in any traditional sense? Many of the things he produced took very little time to produce. I think, certainly after 1950, that's the case. That's the problem. Anyway, I'll show you some paintings. Is that okay, Dr. Shin?
Yeah.
I'll show you lots of paintings with him. I have a good book, a good collection of his works that has helped me a lot. Here's an early thing. Whom does it not resemble, but from whom does it take its inspiration? Gauguin. I would say Gauguin. Those blocks of unusual color. The subject matter is Parisian in itself. I'm going to try to go fast and not linger on many. I'll skip some of this early stuff. The subject matter, Degas. We've never discussed Degas, but Degas was an impressionist and one of the best. He and Toulouse-Lautrec, whom we haven't discussed, a post-impressionist, often chose interiors. Really, Picasso is an interior painter. He's not an outdoor painter. None of his works has much to do with nature. In that sense, I admire that, I think. And he stuck with that. Now, these strange, mannered people, inhabitants of bars. Really, of these first paintings, many take place in a bar or show a couple in a bar. Now, here's as close as he gets to Vincent van Gogh. The characters, the subjects, the characters are kind of from this nocturnal world, from this strange world. This woman appears to be a dwarf, D-W-A-R-F. But the style here is Vincent, or close to it. The striking of the canvas with the brush to create a block of paint. Now, Cézanne did this too. These are all 1901, and remember, it wasn't until 1905 that Cézanne made his great impression, because in 1905 there appeared the huge exhibit of Cézanne in Paris, of course, which really changed the world of art. His first famous ones belong to what is called the Blue Period, and I'll show these kind of quickly. A couple of them are pretty famous, are quite famous still. This is not quite blue, but you'll see right away. And here's the fully blue, and the most famous blue, maybe. That old guitarist. Notice, by the way, many of these people simply look Spanish. I haven't said that yet, but these people are Spanish. They're Spaniards. They're not French. And it is true, the Spanishness, the Hispanicness of Picasso's people and subjects, I think, is probably true. It's one element of his art. Did he do this on purpose? I doubt it. It just happened. Now, kind of transition. Loves those big bodies, as most artists do. And now the rose period, or pink period. Not quite yet, but you'll see. Oh no, still blue. In and out of blue. Sorry, forgot these. I'm going to give you brief looks. Since you'll be watching this on film, you can stop the film anytime and linger on these things. Now, pink. This is the most famous of that period, Les Saltimbanques. Family of traveling entertainers, circus more or less. Rilke, R-I-L-K-E, the greatest German poet of the past 150 years, wrote a poem about this. Rilke was very involved in the Parisian art world because Rilke spent about 10 years in Paris during this period as the private secretary to Rodin, the sculptor, the famous sculptor. So, very involved. For some people, these are many people's favorite Picassos. I think that's a pity to be locked. I better explain what's going on here a little bit. Let me show a couple of things. Why does he paint a subject like this? Artists, when they choose a topic, a theme, and when they paint it, are thinking of not so really. I think they're seldom thinking of the subject. Certainly for the past 100 years, they're thinking of the arrangement of color, the composition. They're thinking of problems. Poetry is a little like this too, especially traditional poetry that is in traditional forms like the sonnet. These present a formal problem. Even I have formal problems too, but it's not like these guys. Now here's a famous early self-portrait. That's Picasso. He's a young man, and it's recognizable. Here's maybe the most famous, but who knows why? This portrait of Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein was an American novelist living in France with her sister for many years, and she supported the arts. They had money, and she supported Picasso at this early stage. Didn't support him, but bought paintings. 1906. Remarkable. Now, the first important painting that he painted, I mentioned the other day, in connection with Cézanne. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, the Ladies of Avignon. Now, Avignon here is not the town in southern France. Avignon is a district of Barcelona. I think I was wrong the other day. Not Paris, of course. Barcelona, and these women are prostitutes. But what is really important is the influence of Cézanne and those African masks that suddenly appear on these ladies. Now, everyone says this. The year is 1906, by the way, the year of Cézanne's death. Everyone says that this is about a kind of attempt so similar to Cézanne on the part of Picasso to purge himself of fears of women and sexuality. Maybe it does. I think that is what the topic, what's really going on in this painting. But we notice that he's breaking form into these geometrical figures more and more. Circles, squares, cubes, triangles, and that's where he's going right now. So this is a hugely important painting in the history of painting. It's leading directly to Cubism. And watch the road that he takes in this time. Cubism is where he's going. And You who don't know what Cubism is can rewind easily after we get ahead, and you'll appreciate these even more. I think the year that he met Georges Braque, is probably about 1907. Braque, Braqueus. Look what's happening to the human figure. The same thing that Cézanne had happened in late Cézanne. Same thing. Picasso is following Cézanne. Now, Picasso was already a fully competent and fully self-confident artist. The fact that he poured himself into this Cézanne mentality is huge. Now, he's a very young man, too. Here he's 25, 26, 27, 28 years old. That he became a Cézanne guy so resolutely, with such singleness of purpose, is the tribute to Cézanne. And Picasso himself said, he's famous for having said, "We are all sons of Cézanne." We all, meaning all artists painting, one could say, in the 20th century. Well, this means that Cézanne is... Cézanne and Giotto, this could be said, Cézanne and Giotto are the two most influential artists in the history of Western art. They changed art single-handedly, as no one else comes close. All Western art veers into a certain direction because of Giotto, and then it does the same thing with Picasso. He's inescapable, especially because of the Cubist period. Now, does that make him great? I suppose. The problem is to find those paintings that one says, this is great, of. That's the problem. Cézanne. Pure Cézanne. Even the colors. Even the colors. The geometrical patterns and shapes. The objective world disappears. If we compare this with what he was doing, this is 1909, what he was doing in 1902, we see that he has ceased to become, and this I must discuss, he is ceasing to become a representational painter. Now, art is either representational or abstract. These are the words used by art historians. Representational art, of course, tries to represent some recognizable objects, people, things, cups, whatever, things that we can recognize and put them on the canvas. Abstract art, of course, leaves that behind completely. Now, it is true that whatever we see on the canvas is in some sense representational. We recognize something or other. It's still color, for example. It's still form. And these are the two main elements of art, color and form. But when we cease to see objects of our world around us, then that art is abstract. Now, I think I explained in talking about Cézanne before why artists would do that. Part of the reason is photography. The existence of photography changes art, of course. For artists to compete with photography for accuracy in depicting the world is absurd. Absolutely absurd. There's something kind of quaint and silly about it when artists do that. One can admire it, but a little quaint, a little silly, a little stubborn, heroically stubborn, sometimes maybe. But we who look for representational art and who prefer it, it's okay. After all, canvas, 2 dimensions, length and width, no third dimension. Why did Western art why did Western art seek to be so representational during the years from 1200 to 1900, 700 years? I think it's possible to make a theory about this, and this is not original with me, and I've never read a full exposition of it, but some of it is obvious. It's interesting to regard this as the period of the rise of the rise and the glory of the middle class. After all, this coincides roughly with the rise of the bourgeoisie or middle class. The rise of science can be seen in this connection too. Okay, let's call this period realism. Realism won't do, but realism, because at least it's representational. During this period, then, the middle class rises to power and tries to control, to master objective reality. What is science but an attempt to master objective reality? That's what science is. To understand, of course, is to control, and that's our goal. One can easily fit this into what I was talking about in my autobiographical sketches about eritis sicut dii, you will be as gods, knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. Our obsession with knowledge are not very admirable, in fact, in some ways not at all admirable. Quest for knowledge really is quest for control. Really, the ultimate source of this drive is to try to defeat death. To fully be as gods, of course, means not to die. In no other sense is it very important. To control reality and yet to die doesn't change much. We remain the same creature we are, fearful and anxiety-ridden and all that. The ultimate goal is to defeat death. That's the ultimate goal of mankind. That's the ultimate goal of science. And science is simply an expression of that. Back to art now. In 1900, at or near 1900, when Cézanne was doing his last works, this attempt to master and control objective reality ended. In favor of what? What Cézanne was doing, what his revolution really meant was, he was reminding us that this really is just a painting. This is just art. And art is simply color and form on a flat surface. Painting, anyway. On canvas, anyway. That's what art is. And so he was liberating art from the need, apparently, which had become too absurd, to represent reality on canvas. He was liberating the artist to say, put whatever you want on there. Put color and form on the canvas where it belongs and make it as beautiful as you can. But certainly don't expect to represent external reality, because, frankly, photography does it much better. Okay, on with Picasso. We are now entering, here we go, the Cubist period. Wow. Now, don't look for color much. The colors are unspectacular. Dark, not gloomy, but steely, cold. Cubist art, there's no warmth to it, and that's one complaint. By the way, this is a guitarist. Look at him, he's disappearing. Here's a person, but the person is disappearing behind the geometrical shapes. Now, a question. Why would a man like Picasso be so fascinated with this? In my opinion, what he's trying to do is the same thing that Cézanne was doing. Ultimate source of that drive. And this took years for him to... he was involved in this for 5 years of his life. 5 key years of his life. I think he's trying to become classical. He's trying to get control of his emotions. He's trying to reduce... he's trying to become a classic. a classical painter, a classical human being even. What does that mean? What does it mean? To look at it as the opposite of romantic. The romantic or expressionist, which is simply a romantic, there are lots of offshoots of these, but these are the two main drives in art. Romantic, classic. The romantic celebrates emotion, celebrates feeling. Emotion, in one word, emotion. Color, a romantic who is not a colorist, impossible. Love, joy, all these emotions, sadness, emotion. Emotion makes life for the romantic. In all fields, not just art, anything else too. The classic celebrates intellect, analytical intelligence. Analytical intelligence. For myself at my age, I want to be a classic. But that's normal for a person my age, I would think. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't know. That's what I admire. I admire the classical mentality. And the classical mentality analyzes coolly, perhaps with irony, wit. Definitely, romantics are not witty. Romantics are relatively humorless. That's okay, but I prefer the classic. Now, what other values of classical art? And I'll tell you a few of the artists who are classical. Raphael. Raphael is the classical artist. Cézanne was, in a sense, trying to be like Raphael a little bit. That's an interesting parallel. Who else? Velázquez, the great Spanish painter. Velázquez is a classical mentality. The mind in control, analyzing, making decisions coolly, the thought process drives his great paintings, and there's no escape. Vermeer, another, the Dutch painter. I'll talk about that sometime because the topic is too big. But a painter, a young man especially, like Piccasso, nearing 30, who spends 5 years, 25 to 30, let's say, or let's say 28 to 33, those years of his life, painting these analytical paintings, no celebration of color. This man is escaping from emotion. This man is fleeing from emotion and saying to himself, I'm going to gain control of myself because I know that by doing this, I can do anything. If I surrender to feeling, I don't like that anymore. That's what he's saying, and that's what a cubist says. Giotto is a classic. He's possibly the greatest classic. Now, here we go. Now he's going to start doing collage. Koreans seem to know a lot about that. This putting together surfaces, a newspaper article or headline here, a piece of paper from an advertisement here, all these things thrown together. Why does he do this? I don't know. I am certainly no expert on Piccasso and certainly no expert on modern art. I have tried to wrestle with Piccasso and find out for myself, because the question interests me, what is he doing and is he a great painter? Now that may be silly, that may be a silly pursuit, but that's what really interests me, really in all of the arts and all thought too. Is there greatness here, and why? Picasso is a problem for me. What's he up to here? What's he doing? I don't know. Art historians, I think, have a good explanation for these things, but I don't know them. Not that art historians are necessarily right, but they read his letters and they have a record of his conversations maybe, and at least what he is trying to do, or what he is intending to do. Notice the color is gone. Color is gone. But you know, from the start, Picasso was never a colorist. From his earliest paintings, he was never a colorist. He will try to become one later. That's true. But those early things, most of which you've seen already, I won't show them again. But look back. You will not find a colorful painting among these paintings. None. Color does not dominate. And now he's fleeing from color. Okay. I'll just show some paintings here. Cubist, Cubist, Cubist. And an amusing pursuit is to show some of Braque's paintings too. Georges Braque, his friend. They must have been very good friends during that time. And there are many paintings, I don't know how many, but I bet there are 30 paintings, of which it is very difficult to say which one is by Braque and which one is by Picasso. Incredible. Actually, there has never been... Yes, there has. There have been a couple of collaborations like this. Collaboration... they didn't both work the same piece, so it doesn't quite... It's not fully collaboration, but collaboration in the sense of working side by side. The other most famous instance of this, very important, maybe more important, is Titian, the greatest of all artists, as I've said, in my opinion, and Giorgione. Giorgione, who died early, and I mentioned him in the Italian Renaissance show, lecture. Giorgione died early. Giorgione was already a great painter before he died at 32. He and Titian worked together, and then Titian completed many, how many? I'm not sure, 10 paintings, and no one can say which part Giorgione is responsible for and which part Titian is responsible for. That's a collaboration, unintentional, the man died, but it's still... That's remarkable. What was Titian doing in those? He was absorbing Giorgione. That's what he wanted to do when he did that. Paying tribute like that. First of all, it's, I assume, a loving tribute to the man who had died. But second of all, it's a statement that says, I want to absorb everything from that man's art. Everything. I want to own that man's style. And that's what he did. Anyway, Picasso and Braque, different, obviously, but when you can't tell which is which, that's remarkable. Now, what is he up to when he starts doing this? Collage, crude. I mean, this is crude. And maybe some art historian will be able to tell me in what way this is subtle or profound. I'm sorry, I don't see it. I don't see why Picasso did this. Now, I like some of his later stuff, and I'll tell you why, or I'll try to. But what's going on here, I don't know. The year 1913, just before World War I began. World War I is huge, 1914 to 1918. America only entered in 1917, remember. Americans have very little sense of World War I. But the Europeans had 4 years of that terrible war. Okay. Now we're in 1914, and the war either is about to begin or has already begun. Collage. He's doing his collages. I'll show them relatively quickly. It doesn't take long to absorb them, I think. Back to a little cubism. Modified cubism, but notice no color. The colors are almost gone. Almost gone. I think the only way to see that is what I said. This is a man who is trying to escape from emotion. And that's probably the best way to explain all of this. Classical, maybe, but classical in the psychological sense of mastering himself and his emotions. That's what he takes to be the business of life and art during this period. Now, here's an interesting one, 1919. 1919, you might say this is a celebration of that the war is finally over. By the way, he's already a very famous man. Now here's a man who was very famous for, when did he become famous? 1910? He was already a master in 1910, and he wasn't 30. He died in 1973. World famous, he was almost world famous by 1910, certainly by 1915. So he was world famous most of his life, 60 years. He could do anything he wanted. He had money, increasing. By the end, he was many times a millionaire. The most successful, I wouldn't say really, Titian still has that honor, I would say, because Titian was buddies with emperors and kings. But Picasso is the second most successful of all artists in the history of art. He owned the art world in many ways. He had some rivals, Matisse, namely Matisse, later maybe Pollock, I don't know, but they were very secondary to Picasso. Now look at this. He's slipping back into representational art. A little warmth, though color no. These are important paintings, I would say, because they reminded us that, after all, if he had wanted to, especially one like this was one of his wives, second wife, I think. They remind us that if he had wanted to paint traditional representational art, of course he could have. He could paint anything. With his training and his skills, he could paint anything he wanted to. And that is the biggest element in any evaluation of Picasso, for people like me anyway. And I'm no expert, and I'm really not very sophisticated in where Picasso is concerned, not at all, even though I've tried. But when you consider that this man could paint anything, but chose the styles that he did, I haven't said this yet, but it's the single most important thing about Picasso. The man changed all the time. If one tries to divide his career into periods, and one can do that, 10, 12 periods, what? Only, once again, only Titian is comparable. Titian, in my opinion, a much greater artist, but I'm prejudiced, I guess. Anyway, but remember, he could paint anything he wanted, and he chose these various things that he did paint, these styles, which mostly he invented. That's to his credit too. He was a leader, he was not a follower. He got up in the morning and started painting, and he followed his own instincts, his own thoughts, because he was a thinking artist. He was a relatively articulate artist, as judged by the things he said. But art was color and form were his media, let's say. So he's thinking all the time, making decisions all the time, thinking about what? I think, once again, problems. Each canvas is a problem. And that's how artists think anyway. But Picasso maybe more than most. And so if you look at any single painting and say, what problems was he trying to solve in this painting? I think that's an intelligent way to approach Picasso or any other artist. Okay. My God, even a still life. Notice the hatchings, this network of dark, suggesting shadows around the chest there. You see what I mean? Almost by pen and ink. Hatchwork, I think it's called. That's interesting. When a man like Picasso does that, it's almost like a joke. Why would he do that? It's so out of date. This painting seems to be so out of date, 1919, but I don't know. Now watch. He goes into a different kind of classical period, I think. And really he comes in and out of this for a long time, maybe 20 years. It seems to me what he's doing is applying the same principles of the same motive is driving him during this period as drove him during the Cubist period, but he's changed the subject matter from things to people. He's trying to become a classical painter of people. And so these bodies, these thick, cumbersome, so solid, so weighty bodies, these are the bodies of Giotto. That is, they occupy space. They have visibly weight. That's what he is trying to do now. These are classical. This is a classical approach, and now he applies it to people. Now, I'll just show you several paintings and you'll see. Notice how heavy he's made these people. This is classical, like Greek sculpture. He's importing Greek sculpture into art. Now he slips back into these things. But watch, when he paints people, you'll see for a long time, 20 years I bet, until World War II. Here's a famous painting, and maybe it's great, The Three Musicians. You can find the three musicians there. I won't get into it. It's an interesting painting, I admit. I'm not sure what statement is being made by this painting, but it's interesting. In fact, that gets me to my ultimate opinion of Picasso. Great, maybe. Interesting, almost always. A man who could paint interesting paintings for 70 years, that's pretty remarkable. Now, part of that is a biological accident, the fact that he lived 70 years. But all those paintings and sculptures too, and other things that he made, always interesting. Now, I'll take it a step further, because this is my real opinion. I think the word beauty had little or no meaning to him. Or I think maybe even he scorned it. I think he scorned the word beauty. Beauty is a word used by sentimental amateurs, romantics and other fools. I wonder if he would agree with that. But maybe he would agree with that. Certainly, I don't see any attempt to approximate to what we call beauty in any traditional sense. And I almost think he would have been disgusted if anyone had called any single painting of his beautiful. He was not interested in that. Now, in my opinion, many of Cézanne's are beautiful. Vincent, maybe beauty wasn't too important. The style seems to contradict it. Cézanne, it's possible to say that Cézanne is the last painter. I wonder if this is true. Cézanne is the last painter who painted beautiful paintings. But this is a mark of Cézanne's real greatness, because he rose above everything. Classical intellect and beauty. Well, this makes him one of the giants. And as I told you before, for me, the kings of art history in the Western world in painting have always been Titian, Rembrandt, and Cézanne. But I sort of recently, through Dr. Shin's the opportunity to talk about this, I have moved Cézanne for me into the second category, along with Giotto and Velázquez, Raphael, because he didn't deal with deeply human problems. He avoided deeply human problems. He was concerned about art and his own adventure with art. I want a person, Rembrandt as such, who uses art as a medium to get at something deeper, something profound. Cézanne is not that man. Titian is, and Rembrandt is, in my opinion. Okay. I'm going to get to more of these classical figures. Beautiful, the word is irrelevant. The word is irrelevant in Picasso, in my opinion. And it's not irrelevant because it's not accidental. He wanted it to be irrelevant. Now, a couple of these famous romantic paintings. What's a Picasso doing painting this? I almost think he painted it for one of his children. In other words, it's almost a joke that it be in a serious art book. Maybe that's true. Look at the colors, the traditional subject matter, the traditional pose. It's interesting. It's done quickly. The outlining of the figure, you can see the dark outlining of the figure. That's not always a sign because all of Picasso's are like that. But probably done in haste. Okay, I'm going to show some others. What year? Excuse me. We are now 1923 only. Oh. He still lived 50 more years. 50 more years beyond this. Already so famous. Mostly in Paris. I've better skip some. We're running out of time. This sentimental thing. His own child. Most people who are not very interested in art love things like that, but really it's a sentimental piece of trash. Even I would say that. Okay, now here's Picasso, maybe quintessential Picasso. Beauty? No. Picasso is abrasive. I would make that statement. Picasso is abrasive, like sandpaper. He's in your face. He's in our face. He's saying, this is what I wanted to paint. I had some problems that I tried to deal with or overcome in this painting. Whether you like it or not does not interest me at all. Good, thank you. I spent too long on the early ones, but that's okay. Let's talk about Guernica. There's a full, this will challenge you in your photography, Dr. Shin. There's a full page fold out here. 3 pages.
Wow.
Want to take it from left to right, maybe?
Uh-huh.
I'll kind of move it past your... Try to slow down here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Guernica. This is his greatest work, in my opinion. It's serious. It's serious. And artists don't find or take the opportunity to paint such serious things often. And as far as I know, Picasso didn't. It's a stroke of luck, almost luck, that the topic fell into his arms, that he embraced it, that he produced a great work, a significant work, and that it's about such a serious topic at a serious moment. All this coalesces, all this comes together in Guernica. First of all, Guernica is still a small town in what is called Basque country, Basque. Now the Basques have their own language. They are an ancient people. Basque country occupies part of northern Spain and southern France. Now this is political. Politics is involved here, and we must mention this. I'm not sure of the years, but let's say 1934 to 1937. These were the years of the Spanish Civil War. And this Civil War was fought between basically Generalissimo Franco, General Franco, who was the general of anti-democratic tendencies, and the opposition were the Republicans, let's say, who obviously favored a democratic form of government. The armies of Franco won the war, and Franco became the dictator of Spain for long time. How long? 40 years? Until he, as a very old man, relinquished control. But for 40 years he was the dictator. During those years, Picasso never went to Spain. He refused to. He was invited, after all, the most famous Spaniard of his time, of his century. He refused to, because he was a sincere believer in democracy, and he hated Franco, and he hated everything that Franco represented. Okay, during that civil war, Franco teamed up with Hitler. Hitler, who had taken control of Germany basically in 1933. These were the years of fascism, and Franco is a giant of the fascist world, and I discussed that when in discussing Orwell in 1984. That is, these years of polarization between the fascists and the socialists, when intelligent and thinking and well-meaning people had to choose between these two, because in the middle democracy seemed so ineffectual. Anyway, so Franco invited Hitler basically to practice dropping bombs on the Basque town of Guernica. The Basques have always resisted the Spanish government and even the French government. The French have allowed them a little more autonomy. They've always been a problem, and for all I know, there's Basque terrorists still set off bombs in Madrid now, today. I'm not sure of that, but they certainly did within the past 10 years. The Basques want independence and have always wanted it, and the Spanish especially have refused to allow them any. And the French have given them a little more latitude or autonomy. I don't know details here, but anyway, on a day in 1936, I think, I can't find the date now, in the small town of Guernica, population 2,000 at the time, maybe 3,000, I don't know. Planes overhead, Hitler's planes bombed Guernica. I think maybe 1,500 people died. Picasso was horrified about this, and he chose this topic to make a political statement. And the political statement is, this is the fascist world. This is the kind of thing the fascists do. Okay, but fortunately, a painting like this goes beyond the politics. This is the kind of thing that people do to people and animals. Some of the most moving parts of those horses. It's a good reminder, by the way, in World War I, how many millions of horses were killed. Because horses, of course, were the means of transportation of large numbers, and especially officers. The horror of such an event, which is, of course, these could be Iraqis. These could be Iraqis, after all. The horror of war, but I think it's beyond war. Horrors of war. Primary statement probably for Picasso is, this is what that bastard Franco did to the people of Guernica. And I think that's probably the deepest thought of Picasso. But the fact is that the painting makes a different statement and a deeper statement. This is almost the history of mankind. We all know what a common joke is, that history is the study of battles and wars. Well, that's partly true. And by the way, as an aside, that's just gives us one glimpse into what basically is an absurdity called history. History is absurd. Not history itself, but the field of study, history. Right up there with philosophy and theology for absurdity, I'm afraid. I've explained why, so I won't go into that. Anyway, what a great painting. Now, I want to show, if we have a couple more minutes, a couple of the others, the directions that he was going in, and I'll just show, and I'll move kind of quickly here because we're running out of time. But the viewer can press stop. A cat killing a bird here. Kind of horrible too. It's a big painting too, as I recall. Kind of horrible too. It almost makes the same statement as Guernica makes. Night fishing at Antibes. Some people say this is one of his gigantic ones, very important, and I guess it is. Notice, color? No. Beauty? No. You do not go to Picasso for color and beauty. You go to Picasso for interest, something challenging the mind. Does that make him great? Maybe. I'll try to find a couple of those famous ones. Death. Nature mort. Death. Where are we here? 1942, World War II. Of course, death. Wow. Interesting. Interesting, I admit. All of these are interesting. But abrasive. Interesting, abrasive, challenging, not beautiful. Down with beauty. Down with beauty. Beauty is a word used by romantics and other absurd people. That's what he says. I think that's what he's saying. Once again, just to reiterate, when one looks at a Picasso, one has to say, what was the challenge that the man had presented to himself in this painting? Why did this man, who could have painted things of sentimental, nostalgic beauty, paint this painting in this way? Forget about beauty, once again, as I keep saying. What was the challenge? It's so remarkable. This has helped me a lot. Even when he tries to be a colorist, he's not really. The colors are kind of there in our face. In our face. Soothing? No, maybe try this. He refuses to reassure us. I like this, actually. And I'm a little bit like this, too. And I've never thought of it this way. He refuses to reassure us and tell us that the pretty world that we want to believe in, that inferior, simpleton artists present to us, he refuses to allow us to believe in such a world. He says, that's all nonsense. That's a serious message. That's a great message, even. I respect that. He's not a realist in any sense of the word, unless intellectually he is. He refuses to reassure us. Sculptures, significant sculptures, very influential, but that's just because his name was so big that whatever he touched drew public attention. And, boy, not many, huh? Only 2 pages of sculptures. Okay, I guess that's it. I hope I've helped you understand this man a little bit, or given you some things to think about when you look at a Picasso.